Bacteria have been the dominant form of life on Earth. Everything about human life depends on bacteria.
They are involved in almost everything our bodies do. But just as we are learning how important they are, our microbes are disappearing.
Asthma rates rising dramatically.
More than 2/3 of Americans are overweight or obese.
Why are so many chronic diseases increasing so fast?
I believe the hypothesis is correct, that antibiotics are contributing to the rise of all these diseases.
What's happening to our internal ecology is very similar to what's happening to our climate. We're in the middle of an extinction crisis. It's invisible, it's deadly, and it's happening in all of us right now.
Hello, everyone. We are so excited here on the Front Row Network on NPR Illinois to welcome the filmmakers, the directors of the new documentary, The Invisible Extinction, Sarah Schenck and Stephen Lawrence. Guys, thank you so much for joining us here on the Front Row Network today.
Good to be here.
Our pleasure.
Yeah, so this is, to say the least, a very thought-provoking documentary. It leaves you with so many things that I feel like a lot of people just don't ever really think about in everyday life. And you've given so many questions to this person, and I can't wait to get into that with you. But as always on the Front Row Network, we always want to know about the people who make the film as well. So I just want to ask you guys real quick, the superhero origin stories of Sarah and Stephen. You went from born person to filmmakers. How did that happen? Sarah, why don't we start with you?
Oh, God. I became a filmmaker by accident. I was working for New York City government in education policy, and I did have a bunch of friends who went to Columbia Film School, one of whom asked me if I could make a jail set for him. He was doing a short film. It was set in a jail. And I built, I took a weekend and I built him a set, and then I just stuck around to watch him work with the actors and the camera, and it was mesmerizing.
Hooked
I
you,
said,
yep.
Oh my God, you can make your own world. So actually, this is my first documentary feature as a director. I usually work in kind of weird indie narrative film.
Excellent. Well, Stephen, you, of course, have a pretty big track record with documentaries. So what led you to documentary filmmaking?
Well, initially I was more fascinated by video art and avant-garde cinema. And by chance, when I was 19 years old, I got an internship at a cable TV company that was starting something called Public Access, which was brand new. It was the first opportunity for the public to make videos and use the media. And it was the dawn of portable video equipment, which was really revolutionary. And I started to realize just what you could do, documenting people's lives, making short films. And then I took a course in documentary filmmaking with one of the founders of Cinema Verite, a man named Ricky Leacock, who's quite well known, unfortunately deceased. But that just opened my mind up to the beauties of verite documentary filmmaking and just how rich it could be in terms of storytelling and authenticity. And I was hooked. And many years later, here I am exploring the microbiome with Sarah.
Yeah, what a great transition there, because, I have to really compliment you guys on how you opened the documentary with like a bunch of pop culture references that I'm sure people have seen, but maybe never even took the time to consider what exactly these things are saying. Stuff like South Park and Rick and Morty and all these things that people watch, and they're giving these kind of big heady things, and they just kind of sneak them in there. And I wonder how many people. That's exactly what was going through my head, was man, that's brilliant, because now I got to go and watch everything I ever do, everything I ever watch, and see if they're doing heady stuff like that. I know you guys have some personal stories, though, also of how you were brought to this topic. Stephen, why don't we start with you? What brought you to the topic of the microbiome and the personal experience that sort of led you there?
Unfortunately, my own health. This goes back many years, over 30 years ago, to when I was making documentaries in Russia and Central Asia, and I came back to the U.S. and started to lose weight and have gut issues. And I unfortunately had picked up a couple of parasitic infections. And to make a long story short, what happened to me is very much what happened to Xenia, Marty Blaser's daughter, in the film, where I was given dose after dose of antibiotics over several years on the assumption that I still had the infection. But what I had actually was the symptoms of taking too many antibiotics, except at that time in the 1990s, nobody knew about the microbiome. Nobody was talking about the consequences of nuking your gut microbes with too many antibiotics. So doctors were just using antibiotics very liberally, as if there were no consequences. So anyway, unfortunately, that led to very serious health problems for me, which have been permanent. I'm much recovered from where I was many years ago. But one of the lessons of what happened to me is that when you take too many antibiotics, the damage and the loss can be permanent. And what the scientists are looking at in our film, which is very exciting, is the possibility of restoration. There's both the need to protect what we've got and then the possibility of restoring what we've lost.
Yeah, it's an amazingly stark look at like the work of science. And like, obviously, science has for some reason become controversial recently in recent years. But like when you see the actual work that scientists have to put into it and like all the testing and all of the patience that it requires, it really is quite amazing just to watch them work. And one of the big reactions you got from me in this film was, I have two children myself. And, when you started talking about kids and like what some of that can happen, obviously, Sarah, you had a part of that as well, right? Something that happened that also led you to this topic with your daughter, I believe.
It is true that it's a personal story for me as well. In my case, I have two kids, who both of whom have severe food allergies. And because my elder daughter, when she was a couple of years old, had a reaction to some nuts, our pediatrician, when I had a second child, said, you know what, why don't you avoid nuts totally, and then we'll test your daughter, the second one. And so unusual, for most kids are not tested for allergies unless they have a reaction. So my younger daughter, we did do a whole series of skin and blood tests, and she had no allergies. And that was wonderful news. And we ate, even though my elder daughter couldn't eat nuts, we all ate nuts. We had all sorts of different foods without a problem. But then when she was just a couple of years old, she had an anaphylactic reaction. And one of the reasons it took us so long to understand that her airways were shutting down and she was not able to breathe was because I was like, she has no allergies. It couldn't be an allergic reaction. And what we found out in the emergency room was that she had become severely allergic to nuts. And they said, we just don't know why. We haven't. And I was like, you have no idea why? I mean, what is that? Like, how can you have no idea why? That's such a common affliction. And I mean, to make a long story short, in between the allergy testing for my younger child and this anaphylactic reaction, she'd had strep throat and an ear infection, and she'd taken antibiotics on 2 occasions. And I'm definitely, just to be clear, I'm not saying that the antibiotics caused her severe allergies, but something caused a major change in her body that made her go from tolerating all sorts of foods to thinking that a healthy food is a poison. And it's a common occurrence, and the best research that I could find, and it's proceeding rapidly, is that when we derange our internal ecosystem, when we mess up our microbes, whether it's through antibiotics or other things, we can bring on pretty severe chronic illnesses. And I believe that those 2 courses of antibiotics did trigger allergies in my kid. She may have had a predisposition to them. But I also think that what our film presents a balanced view. We need our antibiotics, and we want people to have access to effective antibiotics, but we also want to warn parents and individuals away from using antibiotics when they're not going to be helpful.
Yeah, and I have to massively compliment you guys on that, because obviously anytime you're getting into medical stuff, especially nowadays, there's always this patina of controversy that always surrounds it, unfortunately. And what I love about your film is that, like, you know, we're talking about antibiotics, and there's always like this view of like, oh, antibiotics are good and everything. Like, they're always good all the time. And what I love is, like, you're right. You present a very like straightforward, no nonsense view of all this. This is what the research is showing. You know, we're not saying antibiotics are bad or anything, but there's, you know, a time and a place for them. And unfortunately, you know, the CDC, as you say in there, like already listed, said like up to like 50% of antibiotic prescriptions aren't necessary sometimes, or, in their study. So I just want to say, like, or ask you, like, Steve and Sarah, like, how did you kind of try to strike that balance? Like, scripting a documentary is hard enough, but when you've got a topic that you know might invite some controversy, how do you go about sort of making that balance there? Or was it kind of easy with the subjects that you had? Stephen, why don't we start with you?
It's, one of the challenges with this film was finding a balance between the character-driven storytelling, the quests of Marty and Gloria, and the patients who are in the film, their quest to get well, and the scientific information that we want to deliver. And we went through many, many test screenings, being told sometimes we had too much information and certain things weren't clear. And eventually, through this process, which is what filmmakers go through, we found what we feel is a sweet spot where the film will be accessible, absolutely accessible to a general audience that will get a grasp of the microbiome and how disruption of the microbiome can possibly trigger various diseases. And of course, we wanted the film to be entertaining and emotionally engaging through the stories of our characters. And at the beginning, you mentioned the opening sequence with South Park and Rick and Morty. And part of that was to try to clue in viewers to how the microbiome has become part of the mainstream, how it has penetrated pop culture and will continue to. And so that was important too. This isn't something that's invisible, but it's something that's increasingly becoming visible.
I'm embarrassed. I'm going to drop a name.
Oh.
Because you're like a super film expert. One of our executive producers, Jerry Orstrom, put us together with Walter Murch, the magnificent, talented film editor who did us the favor of commenting on some of our film cuts and also sharing his own experience as an editor of the science documentary film called Particle Fever. And he said that for Particle Fever, which became a unusually successful science doc, they had 26 test screenings. And we were like, oh my God, 26 test screenings. And at one point I counted, and we had some subsequently, we got up to 20 test screenings. Oof. Where we solicited feedback. And there were times when people did say to us like, oh, so antibiotics are dangerous, I shouldn't take them. And we're like, no. So we have a lot of, our editor, Russ Green, deserves a lot of credit, and all the different friends, colleagues, and random strangers we pulled into test screenings time and time again over a period of years really helped us hone that nuanced message, and you're kind to recognize it.
And one other point is that we were kind of in the home stretch when COVID hit. And so we had to pivot with COVID in terms of the content of the film as well. And of course, the pandemic caused some delays for us as it did for many in the film world. But that became part of the story.
Yeah, and it's I don't want to give too much of an ending away or anything, but it is like the pivot to that is very seamless, I feel, in this film, because you're talking about how this microbiome and disrupting it can cause things that we then learn are like the biggest risk factors when you contract COVID-19, like stuff like diabetes and other, kind of comorbidities that directly lead to more severe cases of COVID-19. So, I absolutely loved how you did that in there. And what I also love about this is you already name dropped him, but Dr. Blaser, Dr. Dominguez Bello, these guys are awesome, because again, I just love like listening to people that I know they are an expert at what they're talking about. It could be anything. It could be, I don't know, like collecting squirrels in the forest. If I know you're an expert at it, I'm going to be fascinated. And these are two amazing lead subjects of this documentary to give us this information. Talk to me about working with them. How did you connect with them to get them in this? And what was it like just kind of being around them and filming their day-to-day life as a part of this documentary?
I did find them, actually. And it was, I'd been making a film on the microbiome that initially was commissioned by PBS, but then the show went off the air before I finished it. And I was completely obsessed with the subject. So I was like, okay, I'm going to see if I can make a feature documentary. Made other features. Let me try a documentary. And I couldn't get funding. And I just kept shooting. I'm in New York City, so there's a lot of scientists here. And a friend of my husband actually had a friend who worked at the New Yorker who published a big piece on the microbiome in the New Yorker. It's been 10 years ago now. And he talked about Marty. Marty's work was he was one of the first scientists mentioned in the piece. And I was like, this guy sounds great. I'm going to just call him up. He's at NYU. And to make a long story short, I met with Marty. He was amenable. I shot him. And he's like, I have this other fabulous microbiologist who happens to be my wife.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they are just the dynamic between the two of them. They are, in fact, very much in love and top research scientists. So it was just they made it easy for us in a lot of ways.
It was a pleasure from beginning to end. And, I got involved with the film at a point where Sarah had done some of this preliminary work and was looking for a collaborator. And, we started talking about the film, how to develop it, where to take it. And then we met with Marty and Gloria, and I had read Marty's book, Missing Microbes, which is, was in a way like the silent spring of the microbiome movement, really clued a lot of people into the importance of gut microbes in our health. And that was published in 2014. And after meeting them, I was just blown away. I thought, well, they're fantastic. They're so relatable and open. And that's exactly what you want as a documentary filmmaker. And making character-driven documentaries has been my focus for many years. But of course, scientists are not normal people in the sense that they use a different language and they work in laboratories and they work over months and months and months, sometimes years, trying to prove one thing or another and sometimes failing. Mm-hmm. And success and failure are very much a part of this film, which is an important thing that we wanted to relate to viewers. But anyway, we had to learn to enter their world and to translate their scientific work onto the screen, and sometimes to explain to them when they were talking to us that what they said would not make sense to the average person. So there's we are, Sarah and I are in ways translators from the scientific world to the mainstream or to the pop culture world, if you want to put it that way. And it's just been a privilege to work with them on this, and I would hope that they would say the same thing.
I'm sure they would. They look like they're having a fun time talking to you guys and explaining this. And again, you're right. Like there is such a need for that translation, because this is an issue that, like the way you describe it as well, there's an analogy of the Roadrunner and the Coyote in this, those old cartoons of like barreling toward a cliff, and you're wondering like, when are they going to stop? And the Dr. Blaser, he's already posited that we might have lost like 50% of our internal biodiversity already, as much as that. And that's a shocking number. That is a shocking number. And you're right, though. What I love as well is that you don't just identify the problem, you identify the people trying to solve it. And you give us that kind of playing field, so to speak, of all the things that people are trying to do here. And, the best documentaries always try to spur some kind of a change in that. So would it be fair to say that you would want this documentary to kind of spur on like more funding and more awareness of this problem and how to solve it?
Absolutely. Yes.
Of course. Look, Jeremy, we want people to see the film so that they can take away for themselves and their families the kind of awareness that you need about the microbiome and how that affects the way you relate to doctors, to your entire health and medical care. Absolutely, we want people to be aware that there are consequences to taking antibiotics, that there can be significant consequences to an elective C-section birth, and that there is this growing problem of antibiotic-resistant bacteria. And that, but there's a lot of work underway to address these issues. Marty and Gloria are part of that vanguard, and I mean, Sarah, you can speak much more about this.
I don't know that you want me to, Jeremy. Drone on for hours.
Oh, that's fine. We got some time here. I got a little bit more time. Come on, but seriously, documentaries, I love them so much because they spur in me the desire to do something, or to at least shout out that these things are here and that they're happening. So, what do you hope somebody comes away from this documentary with?
That is an excellent question, and one of the things is that I often feel stupid. And one of the ways I felt stupid was that I didn't understand that for anything that's a virus, like colds or viruses or flu, antibiotics don't do anything to them. You can't, taking an antibiotic if you have a cold or the flu is doing harm without any potential for good. Again, that's not saying that there aren't reasons that you need to take antibiotics for all sorts of things like strep throat or whatever, but just something as simple as that, I thought I would be really happy if people could, if it were just a general population-wide awareness that don't push for antibiotics if you have a virus. And also I'm a C-section baby. I was born by a C-section. I'm super healthy. We are not saying your baby's born by a C-section or you take antibiotics as a kid, things are going downhill. It's just saying we want to be aware that there are costs and there are benefits to things like antibiotic use as well as elective C-sections. And I guess I would say we hope our film does give people a little bit more information with which to make decisions that are right for themselves and their family.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you succeeded. I do.
Back in the 1990s, when I was being bombarded with antibiotics, I had absolutely no idea what was going on. And, the result, I mentioned that I became seriously ill. There was autoimmune disease, thyroid disease, allergies, osteoporosis, a whole range of things that happened to me. Those things do not need to happen to people, and yet they still are today. Maybe not as badly as they were with me because I was given something like 20 rounds of antibiotics. But as Sarah's story with her daughters shows, it's particularly in childhood that the risk is there. And that's why Marty and Gloria make a point in the film, and because this is central to their work, that it's early childhood when we have to be especially careful about the use and overuse of antibiotics. Marty makes the point in the film that by the age of what is it, Sarah? Three
courses by 2 years old, 10
years old,
by
10 by 10. Yeah. Oh.
And by 20, it's 20 rounds of antibiotics.
Yeah. So it's basically one a year for most.
Wow. And when you know that most of that is unnecessary and that a lot of ear infections are viral, they don't respond to antibiotics, and that parents can look, we're not prescribing, we're not doctors here, but there is the idea of watching and waiting with certain health conditions which aren't are known not to be dangerous. So there's prudence, there's awareness, and this film is really designed as a wake-up call. In the sense that The Inconvenient Truth, for example, was a wake-up call about the destruction of our climate. This is a wake-up call about the destruction of our internal ecology, our inner ecology. And these scientists are heroes. They are working on this frontier. This is the beginning of a scientific revolution, and they are trying to protect our internal biodiversity in the same way that there are so many in the world in the environmental movement, trying to protect our planet and our biodiversity.
Yes. Well, as you say, like, this film is very well made and it's very thought provoking. There is, I think you struck a great balance between, challenging things that need to be challenged and giving food for thought to things that need food for thought that you need to be made aware of. So yeah, guys, thank you so much for today. The Invisible Extinction, it is opening January 6th. And if people want to know more, I know you have a website where people can go to, not just for information about the film, but about their own about their own stuff. So, like, where can they find more information about the film and that?
theinvisibleextinction.com. And they'll find our social handles there. And there's a newsletter sign up, and we'd love to continue the conversation with other people interested in the same subject.
Right. And we'd like to encourage people, because there is a limited theatrical release. It will be available on demand, yes. Amazon, Apple TV, Google Play, etc. And we just love for people to find the film and review it and share it with their friends and families.
Absolutely. Here. Get the conversation going and keep it going. Sarah Schenck, Stephen Lawrence, thank you so much for joining us today on the Front Row Network on NPR Illinois.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thanks, Jeremy.